Chapter 01 Urging Note: The world is so big that there are many things, and if you don't see it with your own eyes, you may not believe it. I used to tell some things to some friends intermittently, but after my friends listened to the bizarre things with relish. They most turn of spring and summer in 2012, two major events happened around me, and both of these events were related to one person, Grandpa. Just after the spring of 2012. My grandfather was an old man full of mystery. Unsmiling, often smoking silently by himself. In my memory of the first 20 years I almost never saw him smile. After his grandfather passed away, he left behind two things. One was a paper shop located in a remote corner of a small county town on the verge of bankruptcy, and the other was a large amount of debt. This paper shop is left by my ancestors, and there is a beautiful paper craft left along with the paper shop. I think my ancestors relied on this craft to support a family in those chaotic times. However, this craft was passed on to the grandfather's generation, and it was almost lost, and the fathers had their own businesses. Since the death of his grandmother, his grandfather has lived alone in the paper shop almost every day, rarely going out, and his fathers will give him living expenses on time every month. But it is not known when and for what reason the grandfather owes that debt. What makes the fathers even more confused is that when the grandfather passed away, he left a will, which has two parts, and the upper part repeatedly told that this paper shop must continue to open no matter what, and it must be opened by the family, and cannot be opened by outsiders. And the second half of this will is like a book from heaven, not so much a word, but more like a ghost drawing. Faced with this situation, after repeated discussions, the fathers unanimously decided to let me, who had been at home, take care of introduce me. My name is Shen Mingyu, and most of the post-80s are about the same. I have a fairly ordinary childhood. After graduating from college, the first business failed miserably. After a long time I was idle at home. When the fathers found me when I talked about it, I refused, because I was not very bold since I was a child. The things in the paper shop, most of them are burned to the dead. When I was a child, I once slept with my grandfather in the paper shop for one night. That night I seemed to be able to feel the breath of those paper people. Their eyes seemed to be on me. However, at that time, my fathers made a good offer. If I could run a paper binding shop, they would pay me some money every month, and once I found a suitable job, I could leave immediately, and I could not live in the store at night. For the first few days everything was fine, except that I was still terrified of the white paper people with bright red lips and blank glasses. But soon I got used to a computer and stopped looking at those things. This paper shop is located in an extremely remote corner of the county, which is somewhat out of place with the surrounding buildings, and the business is even more bleak, and no one will come for a few days. In this way, after a month of peace, I slowly adapted to this simple, almost stagnant rhythm of life. But just when I thought that everything would continue to be calm, strange things happened, and my life was instantly dragged into a mode that I never imagined. The first month spent in the paper shop was outrageously calm, and without the time of day on the calendar. I even felt that time had stopped at a certain point, and this stagnation was broken by a strange event. One evening I left the paper shop and returned home. But standing at the door, the key could not be found. I am a very careful person, careful to the level of suspicion. Every time I leave the shop I will repeatedly confirm whether the key is brought, whether the door of the paper shop is locked. Sometimes even if I go out of a distance will be because of doubt, and then go back, confirm. So the missing key rarely happens to me, and I clearly remember that when I left the paper shop, the key was indeed in the pocket. After stopping at the door for a while, I decided to go back the way I came, to see if I could find the key, but I didn't find it until I was almost on the street where the paper shop was located. Just when I was almost desperate, I suddenly caught a glimpse of the door of the paper shop, which was actually open. I can confirm that when I left, the paper shop was definitely closed, and as far as I know this paper shop only has this one key, and a sense of foreboding immediately hit my heart. Could it be that someone picked up the key and opened the door of the paper shop? Although there are only some white paper people in the paper shop, there is nothing valuable, but the computer is a new one I bought. I saw that at this time, in the paper shop, there was no scene I imagined. Everything was in order. What was it like when I left? It is still the same now, and the computer in the counter is still in the same position. I breathed a sigh of relief, but immediately wondered what happened to me. Is it really that you have been so confused that you have left the paper shop, forgot to close the door, forgot to bring the key and walked straight home? I slowed down my pace and walked slowly towards the paper shop, where the sun had already set, and only a ray of residual red sunlight came in obliquely through the window and fell on the high, cobweb-stained grey beams of the paper shop. I walked over to the computer desk next to the counter and saw the keys lying there quietly, and I sat listlessly in my chair, wondering what the hell was going on. I sat for a while and picked up the key, but I didn't want to drop a piece of paper under the key to the ground. I don't remember I ever put a piece of paper under the key. Then I picked up the paper, opened it gently, and the words on it made me feel like I had been electrocuted. I have always been by your side. I threw the piece of paper aside in an instant, but the phrase kept flashing through my mind like a curse, and I was right next to you. Now in this paper shop, in addition to me, there are all those white paper people with red lips and dull eyes, but they make people chill. Right next to me, and for a moment, I feel as if the eyes of those paper people are staring at me, which makes me feel creepy. I quickly picked up the key, flew out of the paper shop, quickly locked the door. This time I no longer dared to put the key in my pocket, but kept it tightly in my hand. I can be sure that the first time I also absolutely locked the door and brought the key. But how did all this happen? And that piece of paper? Who put that piece of paper there? Is it a prank? Or is there something unclean? I pondered this question all the way, and I was sure that I was definitely a materialist, timid, but also educated in great Marxism. But I was really scared that night, and the words on that note were circling in my head all night. The next morning, when I opened the door of the paper shop with my eyes staring at the big panda eyes, I was greeted by the first customer of the paper shop, an old man in his 60s. This morning, the sky was cloudy like a mess of paste. A few drops of rain fell, although it was not big, but there were not many people on the street. This is a small city that is not online at all, not into the stream. Once this kind of weather is encountered, generally no one will want to go out. Plus the whole night did not sleep well. I didn't want to go to the paper shop. But when I woke up, I still want to see the note yesterday evening. Maybe the person who wrote the note is someone I know. Maybe it was a prank. With this in mind, I dragged my tired body and held on to a glimmer of hope, and came to the paper shop, opened the door, and I walked straight to the counter. But to my surprise, the note was missing, and I searched around for half an hour, but I never found the note. And when I was crawling on the ground and looking for it, I suddenly looked up, and an old man in a poncho about 60 years old had already walked into the paper binding shop at some point and stood in front of me. I suddenly took 2 steps back and sat on the ground. Chapter 11. Paper shop stranger. When did you come in? I said in horror. The old man ignored me, looked up and down the shop, his hands behind his back, his brows furrowed. He walked around the room for a while. Then he turned his eyes to me and said, "What about the owner of this shop?" "It is." I hesitated. He stared at me with blazing eyes. That kind of look made me a little uncomfortable. He frowned and shook his head, and said, "You shouldn't be so young." I reacted immediately. "The boss," he said, "must be my grandfather who has passed away." I stabilized my emotions and said, "You are talking about the previous boss. He is my grandfather who passed away a month ago. And now I am here for the time being. Do you need anything?" The old man sat on the chair next to him with a smile, rubbed his hands, and said very embarrassed, "Do you know all about your grandfather's business here?" Business? I glanced at the paper figures hanging on the wall behind him, and said with a smile, "Look, these goods are available in the store now. If you have any special needs, I will call the factory to customize them for you." "No," the old man pouted and said, "I'm not talking about this. I mean that kind of business." "What kind of business?" I looked at the old man in front of me, puzzled, and a funny thought appeared in my mind. Could it be that there was some special service in my grandfather's paper shop? And I almost laughed out loud when I thought about it. The old man saw my expression and knew that I didn't know anything about the kind of business he was talking about, and then sighed and said, "It seems that I can only find another company." When I saw that he was about to leave, I immediately stepped forward to stop him. After all, and it is a pity to leave in vain. "Old man, if you have any requirements, I will definitely meet you." The old man raised his head, glanced at me, looked at me with distrust, and froze for a while. The old man took out a letter from his bosom and put it on the table and said, "I want you to help me send this letter," I asked, looking at the envelope on the table, confused. "Kindness," the old man said cautiously. "Can you do it? I feel a little depressed after all. This kind of thing has never been encountered. How can there be a paper shop to send letters? These two industries are not at all touched, not to mention that communication is so convenient now. Just make a phone call, even if it is Tiananhai can be received." When I came from somewhere and said, "You can put it here and I will send it to you." When the old man heard this, he looked at me with a twinkle in his eyes and said, Really? What's so hard about this?" I patted my chest and said, "Don't worry if you hand it over to me." "Good." The old man gratefully took out the envelope and handed it to me. The moment I touched the envelope, I suddenly had a feeling of being electrified. I looked down at the envelope. This envelope was very special. It was oily to the touch, very soft, very textured, like cowhide and something. But I immediately found a problem. That is, there was no address on this envelope at all. I looked up and saw that it was empty, and the old man was gone, and I chased it out of the door, and the street was empty. And by this time the rain had begun to fall, and there was not even a ghost on the street. I took the letter and returned to the counter in confusion. At this moment, I found that at some point there was another note on the table. I put down the envelope and carefully opened the note. "At 10 o'clock tonight, on the street outside the first archway, there was a car accident and one person died." I hurriedly looked at the time. It's 11 o'clock in the morning, and this note says 10 o'clock in the evening. Who is playing pranks on me on this note? I looked at the note carefully, remembering the handwriting of people I knew, but I couldn't think of anyone whose handwriting resembled them. I immediately called and told my friend about the past 2 days. My good friend's name is Sunming. We were high school classmates. After graduating from college, he joined the city newspaper and became a reporter. After working for 2 or 3 years, he said that the total things he wrote in these 2 or 3 years were not as much as the college entrance examination essays. Because he writes a few short newsletters every day, he has long been tired of such days, but he has no choice but to support his family. After I told Sunming about this, Sunming said, "Mingy, didn't you stay at home for too long and get a nervous disorder, right? Or is it because your buddy's life is too boring, so you deliberately come to play with your buddy?" "I rub lie to you, I'm your grandson," I yelled. "However, what you said is too bizarre." Sunming saw that I was angry and said in disbelief, "Otherwise let's go to the top archway tonight to have a look." "What to see?" "Let's see if there really was a car accident." right? I was very unhappy with his attitude. And I was a little scared. What would it mean if there was a car accident? I don't dare to think about it. It's boring anyway, so let's go check it out. Sunming seems to be interested now. He chattered and persuaded me. Maybe which grandson is playing a prank with you. If it doesn't happen, you don't have to be afraid. I felt that after talking to him for a long time. The last sentence was still somewhat useful. Hung up the phone, and for the rest of the afternoon, I was in a daze holding that note whether to go or not to go. Some rain was unusually heavy, accompanied by lightning and thunder, and it rained for a whole day, and lasted until the evening, and the rain was a little lighter, and the streets were full of water. And if it was not for the necessity to go out to buy groceries, I am afraid that no one would want to come out. I looked at the time, and at 6 o'clock in the evening, it was time to leave work. At this moment, my mobile phone rang again. It was Sunming calling. This grandson, since he told him about the note, every 1 or 2 hours is a phone call. It seems that the department is indeed idle and a little painful, and his calls boil down to a meaning. Go, you have to go and see. Even if it is a prank, this trap must be drilled. Because this kind of thing is really rare. The most important thing is that he is really boring. This is called watching the lively will never be a big deal. Before the phone hung up, Sunming had already driven to the door of my store. He got out of the car, walked through the puddle at the door in 3 steps and 2 steps, entered the store, looked around at my paper shop, and said, "Don't say it, you really have a kind of eerie and terrifying energy here. You have lived here for a long time. And it is strange that you must be neurotic. You don't talk nonsense," I said indignantly. "What about the note?" Sunming then asked. "To give." Saying that, I handed the note to Sunming. Sunming looked at the words on it, frowned and said, "The person who looks at this writing should really have 2 brushes. And this writing is quite good," Sunming said with a frown. "Guess who's kidding me?" I said cautiously. "You." Sunming glanced at me and said, "You live in a simple place, and you don't know many people. I estimate that this thing is really not a prank." "Maybe it's true." Sunming's words, it also touched my sore spot. To be honest, I don't have many friends. Since the failure of the business for a long time, I will enclose myself in a small space. More to come and go is Sunming. He is in the government unit, usually idle. As for other people, I really can't remember. "Okay, don't think about it. Whether it's true or not, we'll have to eat first." Speaking, Sunming patted me on the shoulder and then pulled me into the car. His car drove straight to the direction of the first archway. This archway is just an archway because it stands on the outside, so it is called the first archway. But it is said that there are some origins. When the emperor paraded here, the local officials, in order to put the royal arrogance, specially built these archways. Chapter 1003, The Mystery of the Will. In front of the first archway is a fork in the road. There are 4 forks parallel crossing. On both sides of the first archway are some restaurants. In general, here belongs to a place of 3 chaos. The environment is chaotic. Public security chaos, traffic chaos, so here is also a place where traffic accidents occur frequently. But it can really be said that the accident is accurate to a point in time, which really makes people feel weird. Sunming intends to choose the place to eat in the restaurant near the first archway, sitting on the 2nd floor of the hotel. You can clearly observe the situation of the fork in front of the first archway. I have no appetite. Sunming casually ordered a few refreshing side dishes, and began to chat while eating, and the topics are some unnutritious idle talk. Unconsciously, we ate from 8 o'clock in the evening to 9:50. The street lights had already been lit outside. At this time there were not many people in the restaurant. The 2 of us looked at the watch, and then looked in the direction of the first archway. The light will be the fork in the head of the archway, very bright. There are almost no dead ends. We are like 2 spectators, waiting for the traffic accident predicted on the note. It was a complicated feeling, and it was difficult for me to describe it in words, both skeptical and terrifying, as the time passed, because it had just rained heavily and it was already late at night. There were not many cars on the road, and almost every car appeared within the range of the street lights, and immediately entered the range of our surveillance. At this moment, a waiter came over and coughed lightly. Sunming and I both turned our heads to look at the waiter, and the waiter smiled and said, "Sorry sir, we get off work at 10 o'clock here." Sunming immediately understood, quickly stood up, took out the money from his pocket and handed it to the waiter. I looked around. Between the lights in the store have been turned off for most of the time. Only a few lights near us are still on, so I am also very sorry to get up to leave. At this moment there was a sudden bang outside, and instantly Sun Yang and I looked at each other for 2 seconds as if struck by lightning, and then looked out of the window at the same time, only to see that at the fork in the road of the first archway, a black car was parked on the side of the road. 4 or 5 meters away from him, there was a person upside down. The bloodstains had darkened the puddles around them. I immediately rushed up, and Sunming followed me downstairs. The car accident happened. It did, and it was 10 o'clock in the evening. When we rushed out of the store, it was still raining outside, but we didn't care about it anymore, and ran to the side of the accident car. The driver was a woman in her 30s, who was sitting in the car shivering at this time. I am afraid she had not fully woken up from the scene just now. I dialed the mobile phone to call 120 and walked towards the person not far away. I couldn't see the person's appearance clearly from the upstairs, but when I approached the person, by the light of the street lamp, and after a brief examination, the doctor shook his head gently, and it seemed that there was little hope of survival. When I got back to the car with Sunming, my body was shaking. Sunming was in slightly better condition than me, but he was also smoking cigarette after cigarette, trying to stabilize his emotions. "Give me a cigarette." I trembled and stretched out my hand. Sun Ming lit a cigarette and handed it to me. I have quit smoking for many years. This is the first time I have smoked in several years, and my panicked nerves finally calmed down after taking 2 puffs of cigarettes. "I can't believe it's all true," Sun Ming repeated the sentence. I nodded, and as I started to say, I had told myself that it was all someone's prank. And I never even thought about what would happen next if it did happen. But now I know, a heavy sense of guilt, knowing that a traffic accident is about to happen. But we can't stop it. "Ming you have to tell me about your recent experience," Sun Ming said with a very serious expression. "All this is simply incredible." In the following time, I intermittently told Sun Ming everything I had experienced after my grandfather's death. And Sun Ming was silent for a few minutes and said, "You said that half of the will left by your grandfather is text, and the other half is something like a ghost." "Well, yes," I said as I dropped my cigarette butt outside the car. "Can I see the will?" Sun Ming pleaded. "The will is not in my hands." To be honest, I only saw my grandfather's will once when my grandfather passed away. "You try to get that will to me." Sun Ming took a puff of his cigarette and said, "Maybe I can find someone to see what those ghost talismans mean." "You." I looked at Sun Ming suspiciously, but Sun Ming ignored me, threw away the remaining half of the cigarette, and started the car. Sun Ming sent me straight back to my lodgings and left on his own. When I got home, I kept thinking of the scene of the car accident at night. The old man curled up, the rain outside was getting heavier and heavier, and my mood was extremely low. Sun Ming said that he wanted to see the will. I thought about it, and then looked at the time. My father should not have slept at this time. So I tried to dial my father's phone. "Hey, Dad," probably because of the excessive fright. My voice on the phone was a little dry. "Well, what's wrong? Haven't rested so late." Listening to the voice, he was already in bed and ready for bed. I hesitated a little. "I want to see the will left by my grandfather." "Will?" The father was stunned for a moment and said, "What do you think that is for?"
"Nothing, just curiosity,"
I said lightly. "That will is in the hands of your second uncle."
"I'll help you ask him tomorrow."
Dad didn't doubt it too much, and then continued, "By the way, Mingyu, the paper shop is okay recently, right?"
"Well, it's okay, it's just that there is no one,"
I said eloquently. "That's normal." Father let out a sigh and said, "Recently, a few of your uncles and I found out something when we were helping your grandfather deal with those debts." "What's up?" "In fact, this matter is also something I have always been curious about. Grandpa usually lives in a simple house, and when he passed away, he owed such a large amount of debt, which is really difficult to understand."
"I'm not sure yet, I'll tell you when I figure it out."
Father yawned as he spoke, and then said, "Okay, it's late.
You should rest early."
Dad, don't forget to ask my second uncle for the will tomorrow," I admonished, and my father hung up the phone as he agreed to me. For the rest of the night, I listened to the sound of the rain outside, and I couldn't sleep, and once I fell asleep, I remembered the car accident that happened at night, and I didn't fall asleep until the morning. I was woken up by Sun Ming's phone call, and he also stayed awake all night, and when he woke up in the morning, he asked me if he had received the will. I told me to call him as soon as I got the will. I hung up his phone, put on my clothes, hastily ate a little breakfast and prepared to go to the paper shop. For a single man's life, although life is monotonous, but rare freedom. After the rain outside, the weather was exceptionally cool. I walked along the path in the direction of the paper shop. In fact, at this time I already had some scruples about the paper shop. More than fear, I was afraid that when I opened the door there would be a note indicating death. If that was the case, I really didn't know what to do. Standing at the door of the paper shop, I paused for a long time, and finally mustered up the courage to push the door open, and the inside was still the same as before, with white paper figures hanging on both sides, and my computer on the counter opposite. I sat in front of my computer, looking up local, hoping to find out what happened to the victim of last night's car accident. Even though I knew in my heart that there was little chance of survival, I carefully flipped through the news on the internet, and finally found the news. According to the news, the victim's name is 65 years old, many years ago nervous disorder. Yesterday while the staff of the mental hospital was unprepared, ran out, did not expect to encounter a car accident, died on the spot. There is also a photo of Dugu attached below. When I saw that photo my body trembled suddenly. I have seen the face on the photo, and it was yesterday. My eyes immediately glanced at the strange envelope placed on the side. I am sure that there is no doubt that the person who entrusted me to send this letter yesterday was the deceased Du Jianguo, and my mind was a little confused for a while. I was pacing back and forth around the room with the envelope with no address. What the hell was going on? I felt like I had fallen into a trap that someone had designed beforehand, and the strangest thing was that I knew it was a trap but didn't know how to climb out of it. Chapter 1004 Nanshan Murder Mansion. Just then, my phone rang and I picked it up, and it was my father's number. I quickly answered the phone, and my father told me that my grandfather's will, the second uncle, had prepared it for me, so that I had time to go over and get it. I hung up the phone, locked the door of the paper shop, and immediately ran to the second uncle's house. The second uncle's name is Shen Chang. He is 64 years old. As the saying goes, the blessed do not fall into the unblessed land. This sentence is used to describe him in a fitting place, because just when everyone went outside to make a lot of money, the second uncle co-founded a mine in his hometown, and the scale has been counted as one of the few in the local area. His home is not far from the paper shop, about 20 min. Went upstairs and pressed the doorbell. The second uncle quickly opened the door, and when he saw me, the second uncle said with a puzzled face, "Why is your look so bad?"
I haven't slept well in the past few days.
I then asked, "What about Grandpa's will?" The second uncle led me to the living room. After sitting down, he took out an envelope from the study and put it on the coffee table. Just as I was about to take it, the second uncle suddenly pressed the envelope and said, "You can read this will here, but you can't take it away." Can't take it away. I looked at the second uncle differently, and the second uncle nodded solemnly and said, "You can only watch here." I was a little hesitant to tell the second uncle about what happened in the past few days, but in the end I endured it. At this moment, the second uncle's phone suddenly rang. He was usually very busy with work. He looked at the number, and then stood up to answer the phone. I took the envelope, carefully took out the will from it. This will was written on a piece of red paper. The first time I saw this will was the second uncle in his hand, and this is the first time I looked at this will so closely. As I described at the beginning, the handwriting in the upper part of the will is very clear, stating that the paper shop must be continued by his family, and that some of the old family property will be divided. The second half of the handwriting was very sloppy, not so much handwriting as a child's handdoodle. I was not too stupid. I had suspected that these graffiti might be some charms to ward off evil spirits. I had read some books about those talismans before, but it didn't look like it at all. I sat on the sofa, wondering what these things were, and the second uncle's phone is endless. He finally simply walked into the bedroom, closed the door. I took out my mobile phone, spread the will on the coffee table, adjusted the focus, gently pressed the confirmation button, just in case. I took 4 or 5 from different angles, and then loaded the mobile phone, carefully put the will in the envelope. Knocked lightly on the door of the second uncle. The second uncle was still calling. I signaled to him to go. He walked out of the bedroom and looked at the envelope on the coffee table, and then nodded. I left the second uncle's house and immediately dialed Sun Ming's mobile phone. Sun Ming, this guy answered the phone as soon as his mobile phone rang. Presumably he was even more anxious than me. "What do you think? Got a will?" Sun Ming asked impatiently. The second uncle is not allowed to type out the will. I was silent for a moment and said, "However, I took a few pictures,
And I don't know if it is okay. I'm dizzy, you kids scare me.
Sun Ming continued. "Where are you now?" "On the way back to the paper shop." "Okay. I'll take leave to find you right now."
And you wait for me at the paper shop first.
Sun Ming hung up the phone after speaking. He was as excited as if he had been beaten with chicken blood at this time, because what happened last night was really incredible. The car quickly stopped in front of the paper binding shop, and just when I thought that things were finally a little bit clearer, I didn't know that at this time, a note that made me even more incredible had been placed on my counter. And immediately scolded angrily, "You don't know that people are scary, scared to death." Although I often fight with Sun Ming on weekdays, Sun Ming has never seen me lose control of my emotions today. He immediately saw some clues. His eyes wandered over me, and finally landed on the half note exposed between my clenched right fingers. His expression immediately became solemn, and he asked tentatively, "Received a new note?" I nodded slightly, then suddenly roared and said, "I should have called the fucking police. And then let the police catch this dead pervert and pull it out and shoot him." Sun Ming ignored me, stretched out his hand, and I handed him the note in a deliberate manner, and then sat on the chair like a deflated ball, holding my head in my hands. "At 12 o'clock this year, the old house in Nanshan will be seen or dispersed." Sun Ming read the words on the note word by word, and after reading it, Sun Ming looked at me and said, "Nanshan old house." After thinking for a few seconds, he showed a frightened look on his face and said, "Is that the haunted murderess in Nanshan, located near Nanshan in the county seat, is a lonely house, and it also has some origins. Nanshan, as the name suggests, is located in the south of the county, is a hill with an altitude of less than 300. It is said that in the early days of the founding of the People's Republic of China, when the population exploded, the population surged, many families gave birth to 3 or 5, and more than 7 or 8 children. The medical conditions at that time were limited. Many children died soon after birth, and children who were less than 100 years old 100 days could not enter the ground, so many parents buried those children in Nanshan. I heard some old people who know a little about Feng Shui say that this kind of child who is less than 100 years old has the heaviest resentment and yin qi, and a large amount of yin qi gathers here, which can easily attract some evil spirits. There are many people who have had the experience of hitting ghosts in Nanshan. Some are ghosts hitting the wall, no matter what, they can't get out, and others are more bizarre, passing by Nanshan, and as a result, they have been haunted by nightmares for a while. Those dreams are still continuous. Once you close your eyes, those nightmares begin to continue from yesterday's plot, like a nightmare drama. The most evil is the ghost baby incident in the old house of Nanshan that happened in the city in the past 9 years. The old house in Nanshan is built in the middle of the mountain in a pit. It is said that it was built in the era of the Republic of China. It is said that the person who lived in this house at that time was a rich merchant in the county. The rich businessman's surname is Qin. I once checked the county chronicle after this incident, and the county chronicle recorded that there are 2 rich businessmen surnamed Qin. One is to open a grain store in the local area, called Qun, and the other is to do jewelry business in Shanghai, and then return to his hometown, called Xuanhuan. Judging from the style of that building, I prefer to be the second wealthy merchant surnamed Qun, because the style of that building was obviously heavily influenced by the foreign winds of the time. And the county chronicle records that Xuanhuan committed suicide at home in the year he returned to his hometown, which also makes me more inclined to believe that this mansion was built by him at that time. According to Ru, Xuanhuan's home does have a piece of land in Nanshan. When he returned to his hometown, he was going to build a mansion here. Who knew that Mr. Feng Shui told him that this is indeed an excellent place for Feng Shui, but it is for the yin house, which is not suitable for building a yang house. And Qin Yunbei is a person who does not believe in evil. He did not listen to the persuasion of people at all, and spent a lot of money to build a house here. She forcibly endured the pain and took out a dead baby from the abdomen. After that his wife died after the rescue failed, and Qin Yunqing hanged himself in the old mansion because he couldn't stand the blow. After the founding of the People's Republic of China, this old Nanshan mansion was once used as a headquarters by the rebels, but bizarre things continued. Several rebel leaders fought in the old mansion, and finally moved their guns, and several people all died in the old mansion. The old house was returned to the government and rented to some residents, but everyone who lived here must have moved out within 3 days, and no one can say the specific reason. Since then, this old Nanshan mansion has become a deserted house. To go or not to go, Sunming asked. Chapter 1005, The Ghost Drawing Talisman on the Will. Don't go. My answer was very simple. I thought to myself whether it was a prank or not, and it didn't matter who was behind it. In short, this matter had nothing to do with me. I took out my mobile phone and handed it to Sunming, still lying listlessly on the table. Although I couldn't say it, I always felt that something was wrong in my heart. Sunming took the phone, frowned and found the photos. He looked at the photos, his eyes changed from calm. Sunming looked at the wound on my left little finger and said, to be honest, if he hadn't reminded me that I really didn't pay attention to this small, crescent-like wound, because the wound was too small and didn't feel any pain at all, I recalled. I'm afraid that when I went to the second uncle's house in the morning to take a photo secretly, I took the will from the envelope and accidentally scratched the envelope, because I was too nervous at the time to pay attention to it at all. Maybe it was scratched by the envelope outside when I took the will, I said lightly. And Sunming then put the phone in front of my eyes, then magnified the photos several times and said as the photo was enlarged, a clear bloody fingerprint appeared on the will. And I looked at the scratches on my little finger, which matched the marks on the will. Presumably I didn't pay attention to it at that time. What's wrong with this? I looked at Sunming puzzled and said. At this moment, my mobile phone suddenly rang, and I took out my mobile phone, and it turned out to be my father's phone number. I knew that my father was very busy at work, so he rarely took the initiative to call me, so I motioned for Sunming to shut up and then pressed the answer button. Mingyu, what did you do in the morning? As soon as I answered the phone, my father scolded me with a slap in the face, and I was stunned for a while. I groaned slightly, and my father began to count again. What did you do to make your second uncle so unhappy? Dad, I didn't do anything. How I responded while thinking. Could it be that the second uncle found out about my secretly photographing the will? Are you in a paper tie shop now? Father asked. Well, I'm here, I replied. No, you hurry up and go to your second uncle's house now. And I and several of your uncles are also on the way. I really don't know what you did. My father hung up the phone. What's wrong? Sunming asked suspiciously when he saw me hang up the phone. He had just heard his father's roar on the phone. I guess the second uncle found out that I secretly took a picture of the will. You quickly back up the photo, and then find someone to see what the symbol on it means. I want to go to the second uncle's house now. As I spoke, I cleaned up, locked the door, and left the paper shop with Sunming. Sunming wanted to send me to the second uncle's house, but I still refused. I was going to walk over, and I could continue to walk to think about what I did wrong. Did the second uncle really find out that I was secretly filming? I clearly remember that the second uncle was talking on the phone in the room at that time. Unless there was a camera hidden in his living room, it would be impossible to find out. But if it weren't for the fact that the will was secretly photographed, what would it be? I thought that I had come downstairs to the second uncle, and I saw my father from a distance smoking a cigarette and standing anxiously at the door, and when he saw me coming, he immediately put out the cigarette in his hand and waved his hand at me. I quickly ran over and stood in front of my father, whose expression was a little serious, and he seemed to want to say something to me, but he wanted to stop talking. Finally he patted me on the shoulder, sighed meaningfully. Go upstairs first. They are all waiting for you. I groaned and followed my father upstairs without knowing it, and along the way I had already thought of everything I could think of, and I had already thought of a countermeasure. It was only when my second uncle opened the door that I was immediately infected by the heavy atmosphere in the room, and I keenly smelled that there seemed to be a kind of uneasiness flowing in the air, and several uncles were sitting around the coffee table, smoking in silence. After my father and the second uncle sat down, the room instantly became a very embarrassing silence. Everyone was worried and silent. I stood aside, rubbed my hands gently. This silence lasted for a few minutes. The second uncle suddenly raised his head, looked at me, and then said, since things are already like this, then tell him. I thought that the second uncle would roar and scold me like my father just now, but who knew that his calm tone actually overwhelmed me, and all the countermeasures prepared on the road were in the back of my mind. Several uncles sat around the coffee table and nodded silently, and the second uncle took out the envelope from under the coffee table and then carefully opened the envelope and took out the will from inside. This will I had seen a few hours ago, so I was impressed. The second uncle didn't open the will, but paused slightly, as if thinking about something, and after a while, he let out a long breath and said, Mingyu, I don't know why you are so interested in this will, and I don't know what you did to this will. I couldn't hold my breath for a while. Could it be that I was really found out about secretly taking a will? I subconsciously looked around the living room. Maybe the second uncle really installed a camera in this living room, and secretly monitored my every move when I secretly photographed the will. The second uncle didn't notice my subtle movements, and said to himself, when your grandfather left this will, several of us were present. And we were all surprised, because we knew the words in the first half of the will, and the second half was like a book from heaven, and no one could understand it. At that time, I also asked your grandfather about this incident, but he was a little delirious and kept repeating a sentence in his mouth. What did Grandpa say at the time? I asked. This is the first time I've heard of this. Hair! The second uncle said these 3 words word by word, but these 3 words were indeed a little abrupt, and I thought to myself that maybe my grandfather was already delirious at that time, so he said these 3 words. The second uncle saw that I was also at a loss, and then gently spread out the will, and said at first, none of us understood what this sentence meant, or it was just a headless and delirious sentence. Who knew that when I checked this will again after you left this morning, I finally understood the meaning of his last 3 words. Yes. I opened my mouth wide in surprise, looked at the second uncle, only to see that his brows were tightly locked, his expression was extremely serious, and he carefully opened the will, and my eyes were immediately attracted by the movements of his hands. His movements were very slow, but my thinking was completely stagnant. Did I miss something in that will? With the slow movement of his hand, the will came out little by little. However, when he completely spread out the will, all the people present, including me, were stunned. And I can say with certainty that this will is definitely not the one I have seen before, because my impression of that will is too deep. Half of it is text, half of it is a ghost drawing, and at this moment, the will in front of me is on the following half of the ghost drawing symbol. But there are words. And what surprised me even more is that in the place where I left the blood stain in the morning, there was a clear blood fingerprint. I subconsciously touched my little finger. The tiny wound that was scratched, at this time it was faintly painful. The second uncle completely spread out the will and laid it flat on the coffee table, and I and a few uncles came over together, only to see that the text in the upper part of the will had not changed, and the ghost drawing in the lower part had completely disappeared, replaced by the 3 words of air, and the red blood fingerprint was just pressed on the 3 words.